Welcome once again to Living in the 21st Century. And today I have in the studio with me a true son of the soil. His name is Dr. Andrew J. Bacevich. He is a professor of Boston University, historian, a specialist in Middle East foreign affairs. Professor, welcome to Living in the 21st Century.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Thank you. Would you kindly elaborate a little bit of your accomplishments over the years?
Well, I'm actually a retired professor at BU. I retired from teaching 2 years ago after being at BU for a wonderful 16 years. Before I became an academic, I was a military officer, served in the Army for 23 years, mostly during in a sense, the latter half of the Cold War. Year in Vietnam, quite a bit of time in Germany, and various stateside assignments. And we moved here in 1998. We live in Walpole and have come to believe ourselves true New Englanders. We like it here.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, Professor, there's a lot of things there's many crossroads right now that America is faced with, and one of those things are terrorism, but more importantly is the relations between the Middle East and U.S. And recently we would have found that the president said that he was going to draw down forces from out of Iraq by a specific time, and because of that it result in ISIS. Far more than that, it also result in Syria, civil war, etc. Could you elaborate and tell us how this really came about?
I can try to, although we may have to have about a 3-hour program to go through the story. And I think that's the first point, is that what's happening now, whether we're talking about the threat posed by ISIS or we're talking about the Syrian civil war, is the latest chapter in what has come to be a very, very long story. Now there's an American narrative of that story, an American military narrative. And that's the story I tell in the book that I published just a few months ago, which is called America's War for the Greater Middle East, a Military History. And what the story that the book tells is of what the United States has been doing with its military in large portions of the Islamic world beginning in 1980. And people watching the program might say, well, why'd you start your story in 1980? And there's a simple answer to that. And the answer is that it's in 1980 that President Jimmy Carter promulgated what came to be called the Carter Doctrine.
Yes.
The Carter Doctrine is a statement that says that the Persian Gulf is a vital U.S. national security interest, meaning a place that we'll fight for.
Yes.
Now, Americans have forgotten that prior to 1980, the Persian Gulf, or more broadly, the Middle East, was not a place that we were prepared to fight for.
Right.
Back in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, we were prepared to fight for Western Europe. We had fought 2 wars in East Asia, in Korea and in Vietnam, and we kept forces in Asia. We were prepared to fight there as well, but not in the Middle East. So that changes in 1980. The Declaration initiates the full-fledged militarization of U.S. policy, not simply in the Persian Gulf, but more broadly in the greater Middle East, and leads to a whole succession of military interventions, some large, some small, some brief, some going on for years and years, that have brought us to where we are today, where we are engaged in wars that never seem to end.
I understand. So there's something also that puzzles me with this, is that I recognize the dichotomy of the U.S. Constitution versus the Sharia law here in the U.S. Does that really triggers the foundation for terrorism simply because we do not adjust to the Sharia law?
No. let's specifically focus on this question.
Okay, sure.
What is it
Okay.
that has led to
Okay.
so much disorder and dysfunction in the greater Middle East, such that
Okay.
authorities in Washington feel called upon to keep sending our soldiers over there?
Yes.
That's a core question, and it's a core question that does not invite a simple answer, because I think there are multiple factors involved.
Right.
What are some of those factors? Well, one is the absence of economic development in that part of the world.
Right.
The fact that there are millions of people who are poor and who don't foresee anything like a promising future. The fact that in the region there's been an absence of enlightened leadership, leaders who have been utterly corrupt and self-serving rather than doing what's in the best interests of Egyptians or Syrians, you name it. We're still dealing with the legacy of European imperialism.
Yes.
The Middle East was created by Europeans, particularly the British, in the wake of World War I,
Yes.
when they sliced and diced the Ottoman Empire, not with the interests of the people who lived there in mind, but with their own selfish interests.
That's correct.
Compounding the problem has been some very ill-advised policies of the United States even before this war began. And a very good example of that was U.S. involvement in a coup that overthrew a democratically elected government in Iran back in 1953 and reinstalled the Shah, a source of continuing resentment on the part of Iranians. All those are factors. So too is the existence of Israel, the creation of Israel, which has been a source of tension and conflict. So too are divisions within Islam, between Shiites and Sunnis, for example. So too is our civilizational rivalries between Persians and Arabs. The list goes on. And the point of running through that list is to emphasize the complexities of the situation, and therefore, to me, to get to the conclusion that any expectation that sending American soldiers into the region or dropping bombs in the region, that somehow those military actions are going to fix things, is an illusion. Unfortunately, that's been the illusion which has been, in a sense, the central theme of U.S. policy in the region ever since 1980.
I see. So that brings us then to the point right here at home. With that being said, how does today present leaders like Donald Trump, even Senator Clinton, Secretary Clinton, how are they proposed to deal with the potential threat of ISIS here, where there are sleeper cells, because of the consistency of interference, not fully understanding the nature of the Mideastern world and how they function as a people and have brought about this conflict? How are they proposed to remedy terrorism here? Will this be an ongoing problem where American government will have to try to fix it? Or could this be something that could eventually be eliminated, period?
Well, I think that they don't, the two candidates don't say precisely the same thing. But where they agree, I think, is on one particular point, and that is we just need to keep trying harder. I have seen little on the part of either Mr. Trump or Secretary Clinton that suggests that they have taken on board either the history of U.S. military intervention and what it's produced, or that the complexity of the circumstance that I just tried to summarize a minute ago. Rather, they fixate on ISIS as the latest manifestation of the problem, and basically promise that if elected, they will bear down, they will hammer ISIS, they will achieve victory over ISIS, as if victory over ISIS is going to make the problem go away. It's not going to make the problem go away.
True.
I mean, it I certainly would agree that ISIS needs to be defeated,
Of course.
but that doesn't solve the problem. And I think it's a judgment on our politics
Yes.
that we're having a presidential election in which we don't have a major candidate who is willing to acknowledge the full complexity of the problem and therefore open up a discussion regarding U.S. policy
Yes.
that goes beyond simply, well, let's drop some more bombs and see
Yes.
how that works out.
Yeah, and you know, these things somewhat made me think. Now, we have a situation where recently we find that most presidents or those who run for president doesn't have any military training. They had no knowledge of combat. But here, yes, we understand clearly they will have consultants in the military to advise them and so forth. But is it somewhat paradoxical to have someone who doesn't have military knowledge only to be advised be chief and commander?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's no prohibition in
Right.
the Constitution
Right.
on a former military officer becoming president.
Right.
But the Constitution is explicit that the commander-in-chief will be a civilian. The president is a civilian. Even when the president, like Dwight D. Eisenhower, had been a soldier, or like U.S. Grant had been a soldier, the identity of the president is the civilian head of state and head of government. And I think that's emphatically a good thing.
Right.
We don't want to think of our president as some form of a military commander.
Correct.
In some respects, I think when we refer to the president as the commander-in-chief, even though the Constitution
Yes.
gives him that designation, in a way we may be playing with fire a little bit. But to get to your point, can someone be effective as commander-in-chief who doesn't have any military experience? And there are some people who say that particularly in a time such as ours when we're
Right.
constantly at war, gosh, we should have somebody with military seasoning.
Yes.
I don't really buy that.
Okay.
And I don't buy that because if we take our two greatest commanders-in-chief, they would be Abraham Lincoln
Right.
in the Civil War and Franklin Roosevelt in World War II. Now, Abraham Lincoln served in the militia back in the state of Illinois. I think it was in the latter part of the 1830s for a couple of weeks.
Yes.
He did not have any meaningful military experience. But as president during the Civil War, he really achieved a masterful understanding
Okay.
of what was going to be required to defeat the Confederacy and preserve the Union. Similarly, Franklin Roosevelt never served a day in uniform. And yet, I think when we distribute the credit for the success that the United States enjoyed in World War II, you'd have to say that the greatest share of that credit should go to Franklin Roosevelt. Not to him alone, but I think those are two examples that suggest that the qualities required of a successful commander-in-chief may include military experience, but doesn't necessarily require prior military experience.
The reason why I would have said that is more recently we would have heard Secretary Clinton stating that Donald Trump were so easily triggered at the slightest.
I get that, and frankly, I agree with that. But I think that's not a question of whether or not he had military experience. It's a question of his own temperament,
Right.
and perhaps his own character. You know, he's a guy who seems to say the first thing that comes to mind. He seems to not be fully in control of himself in moments of stress, and we very much want to have somebody who is cool, rational, who consults with advisors, who takes on board varying views, pros, cons, option A, option B, and then renders a considered decision. And Donald Trump simply does not give evidence of being that kind of person, at least in my judgment.
Right.
It doesn't follow
Correct.
that Secretary
Yes.
Clinton will be a great president.
Exactly.
But I take her point that there are problems with Trump's temperament.
Yes. If you have a choice, who would you say you think would be more eligible to really man that role at this point?
Well, I mean, I'm not in the business of endorsing people. I think there are real problems with Mr.
Yes.
Trump. Secretary Clinton is obviously smart. She knows her brief.
Yes.
She knows the business. She's seasoned. She has thought things through. I don't think that she's the kind of person who is going to go off half-cocked.
Right.
That said, her own record suggests that at times her own judgment may be suspect. I mean, the most significant thing, her record as Secretary of State does not include very many great accomplishments. Probably the single episode for which she will be remembered most as Secretary of State was the intervention in 2011 to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. And that was justified as a humanitarian intervention.
Right.
There were claims that Gaddafi was intent on committing genocide.
Yes.
I think those claims were exaggerated. Regardless, the upshot of the intervention, while it succeeded in getting rid of Gaddafi, has reduced Libya to anarchy, such that Libya has become the site of an ISIS franchise.
Yes.
That's not success.
Correct.
That's not advancing the interests of the United States. Frankly, it's not advancing the well-being of the people of Libya, and her fingerprints are all over that episode.
Yes.
So, to my mind, she's too hawkish, and so I got problems there as well. But I'm not in the business of telling people who to vote for.
Exactly. Yes. So one thing too also that I'm concerned about is the young military servicemen in this country facing the crisis that are there presently, whether it's Syria or an Iraq war, whatever the case may be. What future really lies for the military servicemen in terms of go represent their country and still come back here to their nation after doing their duty and live a rewarding life? I find that many veterans today came back from tour duty and then find it hard to survive in society, whether it's getting a job, and there's still that stigma where they are looked down upon in society, even though politicians trying to whitewash it or make it look good, but there's still that fight struggling to get ahead in today's society.
This is not something I have great expertise on.
Okay.
I haven't studied it.
Okay, sure.
But it seems to me that, speaking very broadly,
Yes.
there's a very substantial number of veterans who leave the service, re-enter civilian life, and do great.
Beautiful.
They adjust. They go to school. They find a job. They raise a family. They, to some degree, probably retain some pride in their service to their country, and they're fine.
Beautiful.
So I think it's very important not to convey an impression that every soldier who leaves the service after wartime service is somehow damaged. It's
Right.
not true.
Correct.
That said, there are a substantial number of people who bear wounds.
Yes.
And some of those wounds are physical, and some of those are emotional and psychological. And there does appear to be a greater prevalence of emotional and psychological wounds with this generation of veterans than was the case with earlier generations of veterans. And I think that both the military and the VA were caught by surprise by the dimensions of the problem, and they've been scrambling ever since to catch up. I'm not persuaded that they have caught up.
Exactly.
And your point's well taken. There's a ton of rhetoric
Yes.
devoted to taking care of the troops, and there continues to be very considerable evidence that that care is less than satisfactory. I got an email from somebody just the other day that was providing specifics on the continuing lapses in care provided for
Right.
veterans. So it's a little, frankly, it's hard to understand
Yes.
why, given people's intentions to address the needs of vets, and given the fact that there's lots of money devoted to that, it's a little perplexing as to why this is a problem that hasn't been fixed yet. I don't know why it hasn't.
Okay. I'm going to take your zone for a little bit. I know this doesn't really apply to the Mideast, but North Korea and China. Do you see or think that North Korea is a potential threat to the U.S.?
Well, it's not I think, a threat to the U.S. I mean, now, those who believe it's a threat point to the North Korean nuclear program, and there's some evidence. They certainly have a nuclear program.
Right.
There's some evidence that they have detonated a nuclear device. There's also plenty of evidence that
Right.
they've had a number of test failures. The concern for the U.S. is whether they are able to take a nuclear device and put it on top of a very long-range missile that
Yes.
could threaten us. And as I have observed from a distance, their missile program, the technology still seems to be lagging behind.
Yes.
They have a lot of failed tests. The bigger problem with North Korea is not that it threatens us, but a potential North Korean threat to the stability of the region,
Okay.
to South Korea
Right.
specifically.
Yes.
Now, were a war to begin tomorrow, I'm quite confident that South Korea, with the assistance of the United States,
Right.
would win that war.
Yes.
But there's considerable likelihood it would be a very ugly, damaging war that would kill a lot of people
Yeah.
and do great harm, not only to the Korean Peninsula, perhaps regions beyond.
Right.
So we don't want that war to
No.
happen. There has been an armistice on the peninsula since 1953. It's been a very uneasy armistice, but we want that to continue. We are betting,
Right.
the world is betting, that the North Korean regime will ultimately collapse from within.
Yes.
We are hoping that when the collapse occurs, it will be a soft landing.
Correct.
But the truth is, nobody knows.
Exactly. Well, one other question before I ask you a little bit to go back to your books that you're presently
Okay.
writing. Do you think it is time that Israel and the Palestinian government find a way in solving their problems, their issues, and at least let Palestinian government get some form of statementhood in the U.S.?
Well, it's past
yeah.
time. It's past time for
Yes.
that. And there's plenty of blame to go around for why there is not peace between Israel and the Palestinians. There's no question about that. But I must say that at the present moment, the greater explanation is the lack of interest in the Israeli government in having a peace.
Yes.
My sense is that the government of Israel evaluates the status quo as imperfect,
Okay.
but satisfactory, and preferable to the risks that would be entailed in actually creating a separate Palestinian, a sovereign Palestinian state. So as long as Mr. Netanyahu and those around him
Okay.
are calling the shots in Israel, there's not going to be a peace agreement.
Okay.
And I think that that's
Yeah.
unfortunate, to put it mildly.
That's correct. So I know we are getting down to the last 4 minutes, and I know that you have some nice books out there written. Could you tell us where you can possibly, because I believe that most American people, if possible, especially those in Newton, should really know who you are and what greatness you stand for, and should be able to purchase a book that you would have written concerning U.S. Middle East foreign relations. Where would someone be able to get one of those books?
Well, I hope in any bookstore.
Any bookstore.
Certainly on the online dealers like Amazon and,
Okay.
and Barnes and Noble.
And what are some of those books that you would recommend?
Well, the one that I would hope people would give a look to in particular is the one that I just published. That's called, it's published by Random House. It's called America's War for the Greater Middle East, A Military History. And it is just that. It is a military history, a history of what the U.S. military has been doing in the Islamic world since 1980, back when Carter promulgated the Carter Doctrine. It tells the story blow by blow, episode by episode.
Beautiful.
And the thesis is that we've tried hard, we've lost lots of soldiers, we've spent trillions of dollars, and it ain't working. Our war for the Greater Middle East is a failure, and therefore it's time for us to think about taking a radically different approach to fulfilling our interests in the region.
Beautiful. Well, Professor Andrew J. Bacevich, thank you so much for joining me here on Living on the 21st Century. And I would like those who would have heard about this book to go out there, get it, and support a true son of our soil. And thank you once again. To all those who are at home, God bless, take good care.
Time to wake up. I've got a job to do today.
I've got a job to do today.
Don't forget, you've got a job to do today.
Hey, Mom. I got the job. Thanks.
Got the job. Welcome aboard.
Have a good first day at work, Mom.
Your donations to Goodwill fund job training programs right in your community.
Feels good to start fresh, right?
Sure does.
And like that, you're a job creator.
This is why you get by on 4 hours sleep. Why you took a second job. This is why you taught yourself how to fix the plumbing. And spend hours juggling the bills. This is why you'll do whatever it takes to keep your home. And that is why we want to help. We are making home affordable, a free government resource that can make paying the mortgage easier. Now more options are available. Call 888-995-HOPE to talk one-on-one with a housing expert today.
Look at you. You're at the top of your game. You're unstoppable. Nothing can throw you off track. Wait, is that your car? Uh-oh. Yeah, I saw that coming. That will throw you off track. You're looking at around 10 grand in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Let's try this again. Smart move. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.